Hey listeners, welcome back to Talk Tickers. I know you're probably expecting, another deep dive into earnings calls and those crazy statements from CEOs and CFOs, but
Right.
today we're going to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah, we're
We're going to
going to
step outside of the
financial statements.
yeah, and really focus on a major news story that broke just yesterday.
Yeah, a major breaking news story that I think has really shaken everyone.
Yeah.
And we're talking about this devastating plane crash that happened in South Korea.
It's
Jeju Air passenger plane flight 2216 crashed while trying to land at Muan International Airport.
yeah,
And the scale of this tragedy
it's huge.
is immense.
Yeah, it's the deadliest aviation disaster in South Korea since 1997.
Absolutely.
179 lives lost.
It's a stark reminder, I think, of how fragile things can be, even with all of the safety measures we have in place.
And as the investigation is just beginning, we want to kind of unpack what we know so far, focusing on, the key details and what this might mean for the aviation industry as a whole.
Absolutely.
So to set the scene, Flight 2216 was a Boeing 737-800 returning from Bangkok.
Okay.
It was carrying 175 passengers and 6 crew members.
Right.
Sadly, only 2 of the crew members survived.
And they were seated in the rear of the aircraft.
And the details of this crash are really, really harrowing. From the reports that we've seen, it seems that the plane skidded off the runway at a high speed, hit a barrier, and then burst into flames.
Yeah. Some witnesses have even mentioned seeing the plane landing on its belly with no landing gear visible.
It's a terrifying image to think about.
Mm.
And it raises a lot of questions, particularly about what role the landing gear might have played in this tragedy.
Right, because it's very unusual for landing gear to completely fail to deploy.
Yeah.
The aviation industry is designed with redundancy in mind, meaning there are backups upon backups to prevent these catastrophic failures.
So for all 3 sets of landing gear to fail, something truly significant must have gone wrong.
Exactly. Now, we do know that the pilot issued a mayday call and was attempting to land in the opposite direction. Apparently, there was a warning from the control tower about birds in the area. So it's possible the pilot was trying to maneuver around a potential bird strike.
But wouldn't landing in the opposite direction actually make a bird strike more likely?
That's a great question. A bird strike typically affects the front of the plane,
Right.
but the pilot might have been more concerned about potential damage to the engines, which could make controlling the plane during landing incredibly difficult.
So by landing into the wind, they might have been trying to gain more control and buy themselves some time to react?
Precisely. Landing into the wind is a standard procedure because it provides more lift and reduces the ground speed needed for touchdown.
It sounds like the pilot was really trying to do everything they could in a very, very difficult situation.
It certainly seems that way. But of course, the exact sequence of events and the decisions made in those critical moments are still under investigation.
And thankfully, investigators have recovered the black boxes, which will be crucial in understanding what happened.
They're like a window into the cockpit,
Yeah.
allowing investigators to reconstruct the flight and analyze the pilot's actions.
They'll be looking for any clues that might explain why the landing gear failed,
Right.
whether there was any mechanical issue, any warning signs, anything that might help prevent a similar tragedy from happening in the future.
The black boxes are really remarkable pieces of technology. They're designed to withstand extreme impact and heat, ensuring that the data survives even the most catastrophic event.
Yeah.
They'll be able to tell investigators things like the plane's altitude, speed direction, and even the conversations in the cockpit.
And speaking of critical moments, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Boeing.
Okay.
They've already had a rough year,
They have.
and this crash is going to add to their troubles.
There's no doubt about it. This crash will likely have a significant impact on their stock price in the short term.
Right.
And it could further erode public trust in their brand. Yeah.
They're going to have to demonstrate a commitment to transparency and accountability
Right.
if they want to regain that trust.
It'll be interesting to see how they handle this situation, both from a public relations standpoint and in terms of their cooperation with the investigation.
Absolutely.
They're facing a lot of pressure from investors, regulators, the public, to ensure that something like this never happens again.
They're at a crossroads.
Yeah.
How they respond to this crisis will determine their future in many ways.
Yeah.
And, speaking of crossroads, it's time for us to take a detour
Yes.
into our This Is Not Financial Advice segment.
This is my favorite part. I have a feeling you might have a particularly intriguing trade idea brewing.
Oh, I always do.
Yeah.
Well, with a story like this, It's hard not to think about, the investment angles.
Yeah,
So here's what I'm thinking. And again, this is not financial advice.
of course.
I'm thinking invest in virtual reality flight simulator companies.
Virtual reality flight simulators.
Oh, okay.
I'm intrigued.
Okay, so think about this.
How do you connect that to this plane crash?
This crash with all of its harrowing details and the potential involvement of, a bird strike landing gear
Right.
malfunction.
Yeah.
It's going to make people nervous about flying.
Sure.
It's natural, after such a high-profile incident, to feel a little apprehensive.
I see where you're going with this. A bit of fear-mongering, perhaps?
Yeah, maybe a touch.
Huh?
But, people might be less inclined to hop on a real plane for a while.
Okay.
But their desire to travel and experience new places isn't going to just vanish.
So they turn to...
They turn to virtual reality. It's the next best thing to actually flying without the risk of bird strikes or landing gear issues or any of those real-world dangers. You can satisfy your wanderlust from the safety of your own home.
And the companies that provide that virtual escape stand to benefit.
Exactly.
I have to admit, that's a clever, albeit slightly morbid connection.
Right. It's all about tapping into those consumer trends and, finding the companies that are poised to capitalize on them. But of course, this is all purely hypothetical.
Absolutely.
For entertainment purposes only.
We would never recommend making actual investment decisions based on this.
Right. It's just a bit of fun.
Yeah.
A way to look at a tragic situation through a different lens.
Right.
But before we move on, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the gravity of this event.
Yeah.
This isn't just a news story. It's a tragedy that has impacted countless lives. Our thoughts are with the victims, their families, and everyone involved in the rescue and recovery efforts.
Well said. It's a reminder to cherish our loved ones and appreciate every day.
We'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive into this story.
When we look back at aviation history, bird strikes have actually played a significant role in shaping safety regulations. There have been some truly remarkable cases where pilots have managed to land safely after a bird strike.
Yeah.
And those incidents have led to improvements in engine design and aircraft structures.
Oh,
This crash could very well lead to renewed discussions about how to effectively manage wildlife near airports,
Yeah.
especially as air travel continues to increase.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
We often think of aviation as this highly controlled environment, but nature has a way of reminding us that there are always variables that we can't fully predict.
Exactly. And when it comes to the landing gear malfunction, that's where the investigation gets really technical.
Right.
Imagine the landing gear as a complex system of hydraulics, powerful actuators,
Yeah.
and multiple components all working together.
Right.
For it to completely fail, there would have to be multiple points of failure.
Almost like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
One thing going wrong leading to another, and ultimately resulting in this catastrophic failure.
Precisely. That's why investigators will be meticulously analyzing the plane's maintenance logs, component tests, and even the manufacturing records to look for any signs of weakness or potential issues.
And the black boxes will be crucial in piecing together the sequence of events leading up to the malfunction.
Right.
They might reveal whether there were any warning signs, any unusual readings,
Right.
or any actions taken by the pilots that could shed light on what happened.
The black boxes are truly remarkable pieces of technology. They're designed to withstand extreme impact and heat, ensuring that the data they contain survives even the most catastrophic events.
Yeah.
They'll be able to tell investigators things like the plane's altitude speed direction and even the conversations in the cockpit.
And speaking of critical moments, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about Boeing.
Okay.
They've already had a tough year,
Yeah.
and this crash is definitely going to add to their troubles.
There's no doubt about that. This crash will likely have a significant impact on their stock price in the short term, and it could further erode public trust in their brand.
Yep.
They're going to have to demonstrate a commitment to transparency and accountability if they want to regain that trust.
It's going to be interesting to see how they handle this situation, both from a public relations standpoint and in terms of their cooperation with the investigation.
Yeah.
They're facing a lot of pressure from investors, regulators, and the public to ensure that something like this never happens again.
They're really at a crossroads. How they respond to this crisis will determine their future in many ways. And speaking of crossroads, it's time for us to take a detour into our This Is Not Financial Advice segment.
Oh, yes, the moment you've all been waiting for. I have a feeling you might have a particularly intriguing trade idea brewing, given the circumstances.
Well, let's just say this tragedy has certainly sparked some creative thinking. How about we consider investing in travel insurance companies?
Travel insurance companies. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm listening. Explain the logic here.
It's all about the ripple effect. This crash, with its wide-scale media coverage and the heightened awareness of the risks of air travel, is likely to make people think more seriously about travel insurance.
So you're thinking there might be a surge in demand for travel insurance as people become more risk averse.
Exactly. People might be more inclined to purchase that extra protection, especially for flights, knowing that there's a safety net in case something unexpected happens.
It's a bit of a dark horse investment, but I see the potential. It plays on those underlying anxieties and taps into a market that might see a sudden increase in demand. Of course, as always, this is just speculation for entertainment purposes.
Absolutely. We are not suggesting anyone rush out and buy travel insurance stocks based on this conversation. It's just a fun thought experiment, a way to look at a tragic event through the lens of market trends.
But it does highlight the interconnectedness of things, how a single event can have a ripple effect across various industries and markets.
Exactly. And that's what makes this field so fascinating to analyze. There are always unforeseen consequences and unexpected opportunities, both positive and negative.
Well said.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I do want to circle back to the human element of this tragedy.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in the technical details and the market implications.
Right.
We can't lose sight of the fact that 179 lives were lost.
Absolutely. Behind every statistic, there's a story, a family, a community impacted by this loss. It's a sobering reminder that safety should always be paramount, not just in aviation, but in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, it's hard to even fathom the grief those families must be going through right now. This tragedy is just a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of, cherishing every moment with our loved ones.
I completely agree. And as we move forward, I think it's crucial that we learn from this tragedy and take steps to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future.
Absolutely. So let's talk about those lessons. What are some of the key takeaways that the aviation industry and really all of us can glean from this crash?
Well, I think this incident highlights the need for constant vigilance when it comes to safety. We can't become complacent even with all of the technological advancements and regulations that we have in place.
So it's about constantly reevaluating those safety protocols, looking for areas where we can improve, and being proactive rather than reactive.
Exactly. And, this crash will undoubtedly lead to a close examination of several key areas, such as wildlife management around airports, landing gear systems, and pilot training procedures.
Let's break those down a bit. What kind of changes might we see in each of those areas?
Well, regarding wildlife management, this crash could spur the implementation of stricter measures to control bird populations near airports. We might see increased use of technology to track bird movements, more aggressive habitat modification to make airports less attractive to birds, and perhaps even changes to flight paths to avoid known bird migration routes.
It's about finding that delicate balance between, ensuring the safety of flights and protecting biodiversity.
Yeah.
We don't want to harm the ecosystem in the process of making air travel safer.
Exactly. It's a complex issue and there's no easy solution.
Right.
But this crash might provide the impetus for some much needed innovation in this area.
And what about the landing gear systems? Are there any design changes or improvements that could be implemented to prevent a similar malfunction from happening in the future?
It's likely that investigators will be taking a very close look at the design and reliability of the landing gear system used in the Boeing 737-800. They'll be analyzing data from this crash, as well as historical data from other incidents, to identify any potential weaknesses or areas where improvements can be made.
So we might see changes to the materials used, the redundancy built into the system, or even the overall design philosophy to make the landing gear more robust and more resistant to failure.
It's possible. The aviation industry is constantly evolving, and each incident provides an opportunity to learn and make things safer.
And of course, there's the human element to consider. What kind of lessons can be learned in terms of pilot training and decision making?
Well, pilot training is already incredibly rigorous.
Yeah.
But this crash might lead to a renewed focus on certain aspects, such as emergency procedures, communication protocols, and decision making under pressure.
It's about equipping pilots with the knowledge and skills they need to handle any situation, no matter how unexpected or how challenging.
Exactly. And it's not just about the pilots themselves. Air traffic control procedures might also be reviewed to see if there are any ways to improve communication and coordination between pilots and controllers, especially in emergency situations.
So it's about creating a culture of safety that permeates every level of the aviation industry, from the design and manufacturing of aircraft to the training and operations of airlines.
Absolutely. And ultimately, I think it's about recognizing that even in this age of advanced technology and rigorous regulations, there's always room for improvement when it comes to safety.
Yeah. It's about never becoming complacent and always striving to make air travel as safe as it can possibly be.
And I think that's a powerful message for all of us, regardless of our profession or our industry.
Yeah,
We can always learn from past mistakes, identify areas where we can improve and take action to create a safer and more resilient future.
well said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us for this special deep dive into this tragic event. It's been a sobering conversation, but an important one.
I agree. It's allowed us to step back from our usual focus on earnings calls and delve into a topic that really has a profound impact on all of us.
And as always, we encourage you to stay informed, stay engaged, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp. We'll be back soon with more of our signature deep dives into the world of finance. But for now, we hope you'll take a moment to reflect on the importance of safety and cherish those closest to you.
Thanks for listening, everyone.